Tonight, we open a door the Vatican pretends does not exist. Not to angels or demons, but to the other sky beings, the oldest tablets remembered, and the Church chose to forget. They were called the Igigi, watchers stationed above the world, silent custodians of a truth that slipped through the cracks of Scripture and fell into the vaults beneath Rome. Their story is not rumour. It is carved in clay and echoed in forbidden books, in cathedrals that stare back with unblinking eyes, in calendars that stutter where history should speak. Follow the trail, and you find rebellions in the heavens, erased timelines, and maps that point to stations in the sky. You find a silence so careful it can bend time, and a memory so persistent it returns in every age with a different mask. If this is your first step into their shadow, breathe, because the air is thinner where secrets live. We are about to read the sky like a page, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Before we begin, like the video and subscribe, and let us wake what was never meant to sleep. Something is missing from the sky. Not a star, not a planet, but a name. A name whispered in clay thousands of years before Christ, carved by the hands of ancient scribes who claimed they were not alone under the heavens. That name was Igigi. Not angels, not demons. Something older, something the Vatican never talks about. In the beginning, before the Bible, before even the idea of a single God, the Sumerians told stories of beings who came from the sky. They weren't myths. They were described with purpose, with rank, with mission. The Igigi, silent watchers who hovered above, observing Earth, orbiting in stations like living satellites. But if you open any official text from the Church, their name is gone, scrubbed, replaced, forgotten. And that raises the question, why? If you search deep enough through forbidden tablets and banned translations, you begin to see a pattern. The same roles assigned to angels in Christianity already existed, only under different names. The same battles between heaven and earth, the same fall from grace. But the original story didn't start in Bethlehem. It started in Babylon, in Nineveh, in Eridu, and the Igigi were right at the center of it. They were not gods, but they were not human either. The old texts say they were assigned to labor in the sky, to oversee the earth and report back to the greater beings known as the Anunnaki. But at some point, something went wrong. They rebelled. They refused to work, and they vanished. Some say they were replaced, others say they came down, and a few say they never left. The Vatican holds the largest ancient archive in the world. Inside it are texts from every civilization you can imagine, from Greek to Persian, from Roman to Sumerian. Yet the Igigi are never part of the conversation. No sermons, no footnotes, no mention. And in a world where almost everything has been given a place in religious history, their absence is louder than a shout. If these sky beings were just myths, why would the Church go to such lengths to ignore them? Why would their story be erased when even pagan gods get a mention in theological studies? The answer may be more unsettling than any ancient scripture. Perhaps the Igigi weren't erased because they were unimportant. Perhaps they were erased because they were real. Tonight, we begin a journey into the silence, into the cracks of history where truth wasn't lost, but buried. We will not follow the usual path. We won't start with what we are told to believe. We'll start with the beings no one wants to believe in, the watchers above, the workers of the sky, the silent figures staring down at Earth before the first church bell ever rang, the Igigi. They are not in your Bible. They are not in your school books. But they were there, watching. And if you listen closely enough, they still are. Long before the word angel was ever whispered from a pulpit, and before the Vatican even existed, there were the Igigi. If you've never heard of them, that's not an accident. These beings appear in the earliest texts known to human history, written in cuneiform on clay tablets over 4,000 years ago in the land we now call Iraq. Back then, it was Sumer, and in Sumer, the sky was never empty. The Igigi were called watchers, not because they guarded, not because they guided, but because they observed. Their job was to watch over the earth, from above, without interfering. The old texts describe them as the workers of the heavens. They were not rulers like the Anunnaki. They were more like technicians or sentinels, positioned in the sky, orbiting the planet, reporting back to their higher command. These weren't gods wearing crowns. They weren't demons dragging chains. They were something else. They didn't rule empires or ask for temples. They didn't come down to teach humanity how to pray. They simply watched. And in that silence, they became something terrifying. Because no one watches forever without asking why. Over time, the Igigi began to question their purpose. According to the ancient epic of Atrahasis, they grew tired of endless work and servitude. They were assigned to dig channels, maintain the heavens, and do the labor the Anunnaki refused to do. And then, one night, they rebelled. The tablets say they surrounded the house of Enlil, their commander, and threw down their tools. That was not a myth. That was a moment. A cosmic mutiny that changed everything. The rebellion of the Igigi forced the Anunnaki to come up with a new solution. Instead of punishing the Watchers, they decided to replace them. They created humans. That's right. In the old Sumerian story, humanity wasn't made in love. We were made to work. To take the burden off the shoulders of the sky beings who had had enough. If that story sounds familiar, it should. It mirrors tales in the Book of Enoch, a text the Church banned for centuries. In it, a group of watchers also defies heaven, comes down to earth, and mixes with humans. Coincidence? Or was the Bible quietly reshaping a story already written thousands of years earlier? The Igigi were not erased because they were irrelevant. They were erased because they didn't fit the new narrative. A narrative that wanted angels who obeyed, demons who disobeyed, and humans who never asked where they truly came from. But the old tablets still exist. Cracked, fragile, and hidden in museums, they whisper the names that time tried to erase. And at the center of those whispers is the Igigi. Not gods, not devils, but watchers. Forgotten not by accident, but by design. The gods were tired. That's how the ancient story begins. Not with divine perfection or infinite power, but with frustration. In the oldest known creation texts from Mesopotamia, a strange and powerful myth emerges. The Anunnaki, the ruling gods, did not want to do the work of maintaining the world. So they created the Igigi, a race of sky beings, to carry out their tasks. The Igigi were not volunteers. They were assigned. Positioned in the heavens, they were forced to dig canals, build celestial systems, and manage the burdens of the earth. For thousands of years, they toiled without rest, until one day they had enough. The rebellion of the Igigi is not some vague parable. It is recorded clearly in the Atrahasis epic, written over 3,500 years ago. The story says that the Igigi gathered in secret. They planned. They waited for night. Then, as the gods slept, they descended together and surrounded the home of Enlil, the chief of the Anunnaki. They did not bring weapons. they brought fire. They set their work tools aflame and cast them down at the feet of their masters. They refused to serve any longer. This was the moment everything changed. Because instead of crushing the rebellion, the gods panicked. The tablets say the Anunnaki grew afraid. The revolt had shaken them, and so they made a decision. They would create a new being, a creature made from the blood of a fallen god and the dust of the earth. That being was humanity. According to this ancient myth, we were not made in glory. We were made as replacements. The Igigi no longer wanted to work, so humans were designed to carry the burden instead. If that sounds disturbing, it's meant to, because it shifts the entire foundation of how we understand our own origin. In this story, the gods are not kind. The sky beings are not saviors. And we were never the center of creation. We were the plan B. What's even more disturbing is that this story may not be isolated. When you compare it to the Book of Enoch and other banned texts, you find a pattern. Celestial beings who grow restless, a descent to earth, a confrontation with power, and then silence. The church banned the Book of Enoch for centuries. They never explained why. But maybe it's because it echoes a much older tale, a tale where the Watchers refused to obey. The Vatican has never commented on the Igigi. Their story is absent from sermons, doctrine, and catechism. But silence does not erase truth. It only delays it. Somewhere high above the earth, the first rebellion did not begin with angels. It began with the Igigi, not fallen by sin, but risen by choice. And that might be why their name has been forgotten. Because in a world where obedience is sacred, rebellion from the sky is the most dangerous story of all. In the ancient world, the heavens were not empty. They were ruled by a structure older than kings, and deeper than any throne on earth. At the top were the Anunnaki, beneath them the Igigi, and beneath them, eventually, us. This cosmic ladder was not just myth. It was a blueprint of power that stretched from the stars to the soil. But unlike the clear order taught in later religions, the relationship between these two celestial groups was far from peaceful. It was a ticking time bomb. The Anunnaki were the elite, often described as the high gods of Mesopotamian belief. They lived in splendor, made decisions, and ruled from above. They were the architects of reality. But they did not work. They commanded. And the work, the heavy, endless labor of keeping the world running, was handed down to the Igigi. The Igigi were the second tier, not worshipped like the Anunnaki, but feared and respected. They operated in the shadows. Their tasks were not glorious. They were the hands of the heavens, the silent ones who maintained order, until they rebelled. This division created a hidden tension. On the surface, the texts make it look like order, but read closely and you see something else. The Igigi were not happy. They were exhausted. The Atrahasis epic paints a clear picture. These sky beings were forced to dig, to build, to manage the functions of the heavens and earth without rest. And the Anunnaki, they watched, they ruled, they issued commands. And when the Igigi finally rose up, that hierarchy cracked. What came next was not punishment, it was panic. The Anunnaki were shocked. Their control had been challenged. Instead of forcing the Igigi back into obedience, they pivoted. They created humans to do the work, to take the burden, to become the new labor class of creation. That decision split the cosmic order in two. The Anunnaki remained above. The humans were placed below. And the Igigi? Some say they disappeared. Others believe they were reassigned, hidden, or perhaps scattered across the stars. But why does this matter today? Because this story shows us something that most religions have erased, that the gods themselves were not unified, that even in the heavens, power struggles existed, and those who watched from the sky were not always obedient. The Vatican has never taught this. In Christian theology, the idea of a divided heaven is dangerous. The Church presents one God, one kingdom, one holy order. There is no room for fractures in paradise. But the oldest stories suggest otherwise. They speak of rebellion not as evil, but as resistance, of beings who questioned their place in a hierarchy designed to silence them. The schism between the Igigi and the Anunnaki may be the first cosmic revolution, a forgotten fracture in the heavens. And when we look up at the stars today, we might be seeing more than light. We might be staring into the ruins of an ancient order, one that cracked long before humanity ever opened its eyes. If you trace the roots of human civilization back to its first recorded stories, you land in Sumer. This was the cradle, the place where writing was born, where gods were mapped across the sky, and where beings, like the Igigi, were first named. But somewhere along the path from those ancient clay tablets to the holy books placed in churches and schools, the story changed, and certain names quietly vanished. The Igigi weren't minor characters. They were described in vivid detail as watchers, workers, orbiters of Earth, who played a critical role in the order of heaven and earth. But when Sumerian myths were passed down, translated, and eventually absorbed into later cultures like Babylon and Assyria, the names began to shift. The roles blurred. By the time these stories reached the hands of Greek and Roman scholars, and finally early Christian thinkers, a decision was made. Some figures would be preserved, others would be forgotten. The Bible, as we know it today, is not the first book. It is the result of centuries of selection. Dozens of texts were left out, others were rewritten, and within this process the Igigi were erased, not with fire, not with violence, but with silence. Their names simply stopped appearing. Their roles were reassigned. In their place came angels and demons, saints and sinners, light and darkness, but not watchers, not rebels in the sky. This filtering was not random. It was intentional. Early church councils debated which books were worthy of inclusion, and anything that did not serve the message of obedience to a singular divine order was either excluded or recast. The stories of the Igigi, with their rebellion, their refusal to serve, and their role in shaping humanity's origin, did not fit the new theology. So they were filed away as myth, pagan, useless. The Vatican inherited not just power, but memory. Through monasteries and scriptoria, they controlled what was copied, what was taught, and what was allowed to survive. Ancient Sumerian texts were left untranslated, unread, or buried in academic vaults. The Igigi, once seen as central figures in the cosmic order, became footnotes, and then nothing at all. But the clues remain. The structure of the heavens, the idea of beings stationed above Earth, the concept of divine rebellion, all still exist in Christian thought. They're just told through different names: the archangels, the fallen, the hosts of heaven. Yet none of these truly match the role of the Igigi, and the Church never addresses the gap. They simply move on. What was filtered out of Scripture was not just a name. It was a worldview, a vision of the universe where power was questioned even by the stars. And the quiet deletion of the Igigi from Western texts reveals something deeper, that history is not always lost in war. Sometimes it is lost in translation, and sometimes that's exactly the point. The Church has spoken of many beings, angels with swords, demons with wings, saints who glow, serpents who whisper. But it never speaks of the Igigi, and that absence is not accidental. In a system that carefully defines every creature of heaven and hell, the total silence around these ancient sky watchers feels more like a cover than a coincidence. The Vatican is not just a spiritual authority. It is one of the greatest collectors of historical documents on Earth. Its secret archives stretch over 50 kilometers and hold more than 1 million texts. Among them are writings that predate the church itself: Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Egyptian. Some scholars believe even Atlantean fragments may exist within its vaults. Yet, within all that knowledge, there is no open teaching, no catechism, no papal statement, no footnote about the Igigi. Why? The answer may lie not in what the Igigi were, but in what they represent. They were not divine messengers, they were not creators, they were watchers, assigned to labor, assigned to observe, and eventually they rebelled. Their story is one of obedience shattered, a revolt in the stars. That kind of story does not fit within the Church's narrative. For centuries, the Vatican has shaped the story of human origin around divine order. One God, one purpose, one fall from grace. But the story of the Igigi tells something else. It tells of layered power, of struggle among the divine, of beings who said no. And worse, it tells of humans being created not in love, but in need. Create to solve a problem after the sky workers refused to continue. This shifts the role of mankind from sacred design to celestial labor. And it shifts the image of heaven from harmony to hierarchy. The Vatican cannot endorse such a vision without tearing down its own foundation. So instead, it ignores it. Even in scholarly works approved by church universities, the word Igigi is rarely mentioned. It appears in cuneiform studies, in ancient Sumerian translations, but never in theological discussion, never in sermons, never in classrooms. The omission is total, and yet the Vatican knows. It owns tablets that mention them. It has records from Jesuit researchers who once studied Mesopotamian myths. It has access to the earliest stories humanity ever recorded. The question is not whether the Church has heard of the Igigi. It is why they chose to forget. In the silence of stone halls and underground archives, truth waits, not broken, not erased, just unspoken. And in that silence, the Igigi remain missing, not because they were never real, but because they were never supposed to be remembered. Long before the word angel was ever written in Hebrew or whispered in Latin, the skies were already full of messengers. They did not wear halos, they did not carry harps, they did not sing. These were the beings described in Sumerian and Akkadian texts, beings who came from above and moved between the realms of gods and men. The Igigi were among them. In the ancient world, the heavens were not abstract. They were real, mapped, and populated. The first civilizations did not think of the sky as empty space. They saw it as a structured kingdom, layered with power and responsibility. And within those layers were the Watchers. The ones who saw but did not always speak. The ones who moved silently between the stars and the earth. The Bible would later introduce the concept of angels. But when you trace that word back, you find it came from the Greek angelos, which simply means messenger. Go further, and you find similar beings in Persia, Egypt, and of course, Sumer. Not identical, but similar enough to ask the question, were angels truly original to the Bible? Or were they a reinterpretation of something older? The Igigi were never called angels, but their role was eerily familiar. They stood between higher beings and humanity. They were sent to observe, to report, to work in the heavens and maintain order on earth. They were not worshipped, but they were respected. Their actions were recorded on tablets older than the earliest Hebrew texts. And unlike biblical angels, they were not always obedient. They did not follow orders forever. They questioned, they rebelled, and then they vanished. In later Jewish writings, especially the Book of Enoch, we find the Watchers, a group of angels who descend to earth, break divine law, and change the course of history. These Watchers share traits with the Igigi, not just in their rebellion, but in their purpose. They were sky beings tasked with watching over humanity, until they chose to intervene. But while Enoch's Watchers were cast as fallen, the Igigi were seen differently. Their rebellion was not evil. It was exhaustion, a refusal to be slaves, a decision to step out of a system they never agreed to. That subtle shift in motive changes everything. And maybe that's why the church avoided their story, because it paints the sky in more complicated colors. Before the Bible, before Moses, before Genesis, there were already messengers, already beings of light and duty and defiance. The church wants us to think the story begins in Eden, but history tells a different tale, one that starts in the sands of Sumer, beneath a sky filled with watchers whose names have been buried, but whose roles still echo in every tale of angels that followed. The Igigi were not myths, they were memory. A memory rewritten and renamed, but never truly erased. There is a book the church does not want you to read. It is not hidden inside a vault or sealed by flame. It exists in plain sight. Yet most people have never heard of it, and even fewer have read it. It is called the Book of Enoch, an ancient text that predates most of the Bible, a book so dangerous to the official timeline that it was banned from the canon for nearly 2,000 years. And inside its pages lies something that sounds eerily familiar, a story of beings from the sky, a story that mirrors the myth of the Igigi. The Book of Enoch tells of the Watchers, 200 of them, sent by heaven to observe humanity. They were not gods, they were not human, they were intermediaries, silent eyes in the sky. And then something changed. They fell in love with human women, they descended to earth, they broke the rules, and they shared forbidden knowledge. These Watchers taught mankind how to make weapons, how to read the stars, how to mix roots for healing and spells for control. They gave humans knowledge that had been locked away, and for that they were punished, cast into the depths, bound in chains beneath the earth until the end of time. But this story is not unique to Enoch. Thousands of years earlier, the Sumerians told of the Igigi, sky beings who were tasked to watch over earth, who disobeyed, who came down, who caused chaos. The parallels are too sharp to ignore. The Watchers of Enoch and the Igigi of Sumer may not be separate myths. They may be the same memory told through different tongues. The Vatican has never accepted the Book of Enoch as scripture, even though early Christians once read it, even though fragments of it were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, even though the New Testament quotes from it directly. They say it is apocryphal, but apocryphal does not mean false. It means hidden, forbidden, and in that hiding, something has been protected. Because if the Watchers were real, if they were the same as the Igigi, then that means the Bible is not the beginning. It is a rewrite, a cleaned-up version of a much older and more dangerous truth, that there were beings before the angels, that there was knowledge before the scriptures, that there were rebellions before Lucifer. The Book of Enoch is not just a religious curiosity. It is a smoking gun, a link between Sumerian sky myths and Judeo-Christian theology, a missing bridge between forgotten gods and remembered angels. And the fact that it was buried for so long tells you everything. The Igigi may not be gone. They may be hiding in the echoes of the very texts we were never meant to read. Across different cultures and languages, scattered across time and space, one strange pattern keeps repeating. A group of divine beings is sent from above. Their mission is to watch, to observe. But they do not follow the rules. They fall. Sometimes literally, sometimes morally. And when they do, the world changes forever. The story of the Watchers in the Book of Enoch is the best-known version in the West. 200 angels sent to watch over humanity, but they descend. They take wives, they father children, the Nephilim, giants, and they share forbidden knowledge. Heaven responds with fury. The Watchers are bound. The flood is sent. The world is wiped clean. But this is not the first telling of that story. Long before Enoch, the Sumerians told of the Igigi, celestial beings created by the Anunnaki, assigned to labor in the sky, to watch over Earth. They grow tired, they rebel. Some descend, and in some versions they mix with humans. The gods respond, the Igigi disappear, humans remain. Now move to ancient Greece. You find the tale of the Titans, divine beings who ruled before the Olympians, powerful, rebellious, and eventually overthrown. Or look to Hindu texts, the Devas and the Asuras, celestial factions locked in cosmic war. Over and over again we see the same shape: divine watchers, rebellion, punishment. These are not borrowed stories, they are echoes. Like different instruments playing the same song in different keys. And at the center of all of them is a single truth: that the heavens were not always in order, that even divine beings had choice, and that choice led to a fall. The Church teaches the fall of Lucifer as the Great Rebellion, but that story does not appear in full until later Christian writings. Earlier Jewish and even older Mesopotamian texts tell a different story. Not of one great rebel, but of many. And not just rebellion out of pride, but out of frustration, out of love, out of exhaustion. When the Watchers fell in the Book of Enoch, they were not cast as purely evil. Their actions brought destruction, yes, but also knowledge, art, science, medicine. This makes them dangerous to any system built on control, because it means disobedience can bring light. That is a dangerous idea, especially in the hands of the masses. So the stories were cleaned, simplified, flattened, rewritten to paint rebellion as pure darkness, and obedience as the only path to salvation. But the older myths remain, quiet, waiting, reminding us that the truth might be more complex, that the Watchers, the Igigi, and others like them did not just fall. They chose to, and in that choice, they left behind a pattern that stretches across the stars. A pattern no holy book can fully erase. Most people know the story. A city called Babel, a tower that touched the sky, humans trying to reach heaven. God comes down, confuses their language, and scatters them. That is how the Bible tells it. But what if that is only part of the truth? What if the tower was not just a symbol of pride, but a structure meant to reach someone who had already left? Someone like the Igigi. In Sumerian myth, the sky was filled with workers, the Igigi. They were not gods, they were watchers, assigned to orbit the earth and serve the high gods, the Anunnaki. But after centuries of labor, the Igigi rebelled. They descended, or they vanished. Either way, their presence in the sky ended, and humanity was left alone. Or so we thought. Now imagine this. The people of Babel knew the stories. They remembered the watchers. Maybe they believed the Igigi was still out there, still watching, still reachable. So they built upward, not to storm heaven, but to reconnect, to restore the link between earth and sky. The tower, then, was not an act of rebellion, it was an act of longing. This changes everything. The biblical version turns humans into villains, arrogant builders punished by a jealous God. But the older version may reveal something different, that the tower was a message, a signal, a stairway built in memory of beings who once bridged the realms. In Mesopotamian culture, ziggurats were massive stepped temples. They were not just for show. They were seen as places where gods could descend, where the divine could meet the human. The Tower of Babel may have been one of these, a super ziggurat, not to challenge heaven, but to bring it closer. But if the Igigi had already been removed from their post, if the Anunnaki had already restructured the cosmic order, then maybe this attempt was seen as dangerous. Not because it was proud, but because it was waking up old stories, digging up forbidden knowledge. That would explain the reaction, the scattering, the confusion of tongues, not as punishment, but as control. A way to stop the memory from spreading, a way to keep humanity from asking too many questions. The Vatican rarely talks about Babel beyond the surface. It is taught as a lesson in obedience, a warning against ambition. But look deeper, and the cracks begin to show. The structure, the timing, the method, all of it points to something older, something left out of the sanitized version. The Tower of Babel may have been humanity's last attempt to contact the ones who had watched from above, a final message to the stars, a monument to memory. And the silence that followed was not because the message failed, but because someone made sure it would never be sent again. For centuries, we were told the ancients saw the sky as superstition, that the stars were just points of light used to tell stories. But when you look closely at the oldest texts and monuments, a different picture appears. These early civilizations were not just storytellers, they were astronomers. They were tracking something, and maybe, just maybe, someone. In Sumerian and Babylonian writings, the Igigi were described as sky beings stationed above the earth, not on the earth, not in some mystical realm, but above, watching, orbiting. That word, station, appears again and again. The Igigi were not just workers, they were placed in orbits, in rotations, in positions that match how modern satellites or stations behave today. The timing is strange. Thousands of years before telescopes, people were charting the heavens with shocking accuracy. They recorded the movements of stars, mapped the paths of planets, and aligned temples to specific celestial points. These were not random guesses. They were data, cycles, patterns. So what were they really watching? And who taught them how? Some researchers believe the stories of the Igigi may be more than myth, that they point to a time when beings actually lived in orbit around Earth, not metaphorically, physically. A ring of watchers stationed above, descending when necessary, retreating when done. The descriptions match behaviors we now associate with space travel. Launch, dock, observe, return. The Book of Enoch, written long after Sumer but still carrying those echoes, also speaks of beings coming down from the heavens, not falling like lightning, but arriving, choosing, timing their descent. The same theme repeats in Egyptian myths, in Hindu epics, even in early Mesoamerican carvings. We are left with a question. Were the ancients just poetic? Or were they preserving memories of real celestial events? And then there is the silence. The moment the Igigi vanish from the stories. no longer mentioned, no longer seen, as if a station had been shut down, as if someone hit the off switch, and in their place, gods become distant, the heavens become symbolic. The Vatican does not address this. Astronomy is studied, but only through a theological lens. Yet, the Vatican owns one of the oldest and most advanced observatories in the world, hidden in the hills of Castel Gandolfo, guarded by centuries of doctrine. Why would a religious institution care so much about the stars? Perhaps because the stars still hold secrets, secrets whispered by the Igigi. If those beings were stationed in orbit, if they moved in sync with celestial bodies, then the myths were not just metaphors, they were blueprints. And if we match the ancient texts with modern astronomy, something strange begins to align. Orbits, patterns, returns. The sky is not random, it is timed. And maybe what the ancients feared most was not that the Igigi left, but that one day they would come back, heaven above, hell below. That is how we are taught to see the universe. Light versus dark, good versus evil. One path saves, the other destroys. But this neat little system is not as ancient as we are led to believe. In fact, it may be one of the greatest edits in human history. A simplification of something far more complex. Something the ancients knew. Something the Church chose to forget. Long before the rise of modern religion, the world was not divided into just two realms. The Sumerians spoke of multiple heavens, layered one atop the other, some for gods, some for watchers, some for travelers of the sky. The Egyptians believed in a detailed afterlife filled with gates, judges, rivers, and stars. Even the Greeks imagined a cosmos with Olympus, the underworld, the Elysian fields, and the chaotic depths of Tartarus. These systems were not about black and white. They were about layers, roles, transitions. Then something shifted. Around the 4th century, as Christianity consolidated power, the story got sharper, cleaner. The duality was born. Heaven became perfect and unreachable. Hell became eternal and terrifying. All middle grounds were erased. All nuance burned away. And with it, the memory of. The Igigi and other celestial beings faded. Why would the Church do this? Because complexity leads to questions. If there are many heavens, who rules them? If there are many kinds of beings, who defines good and evil? If some watchers defied orders to help humanity, are they really fallen? Duality makes control easier. Obey or burn, believe or fall. The Igigi did not fit into this new system. They were not angels, they were not demons. They were something in between. Watchers, workers, rebels, teachers. Their very existence challenged the binary, so they were erased, not by fire, but by silence. This pattern continues today. Most people cannot name more than 2 outcomes after death. They cannot imagine a spiritual realm with complexity. Yet our ancestors saw the skies as alive with motion, levels, and conflict. The heavens were not a reward. They were a system, one filled with order, power, and sometimes rebellion. If the Igigi were stationed in orbit, tasked with observing and guiding, they would have known that complexity is truth, that not every being serves the same purpose, that sometimes the ones cast down are the ones who refuse to obey a broken order. The Church never corrected this shift. It encouraged it, reinforced it, built cathedrals on it. But the echoes still remain, in myths, in ruins, in stars. The great lie was not that heaven and hell exist. The lie was pretending they were the only options. The universe was once alive with levels and layers, not just angels and demons, but watchers, messengers, silent observers, some of them still waiting, some of them still watching. The Igigi are usually tied to Sumer. But what if they weren't confined to just one culture? What if the memory of these sky beings echoed across borders, languages, and kingdoms? To find out, we turn to one of the most mysterious and advanced civilizations in history, ancient Egypt. Egypt's gods were not just rulers. Many of them were linked to the stars. Some came from the sky, some traveled through the underworld, and some moved between realms in ways that sound eerily familiar to the stories of the Igigi. One name stands out, Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom. He was said to have come from the heavens. He carried the knowledge of the stars, the words of the gods, and the secrets of the afterlife. Thoth was not a sun god. He was not a king. He was a scribe, a watcher, a recorder. His role was to observe and preserve, just like the Igigi. He worked in the background, yet held cosmic power. And in some versions of the myth, Thoth was not born on Earth. He arrived with knowledge, with order, with purpose. Then there's the concept of the Duat. The Egyptian underworld was not just a pit of darkness. It was a cosmic space, a place where the soul travelled past stars, through gates guarded by strange beings. Some of these beings had no clear origin. They were described as watchers, standing silent, judging, recording. Who were they? Were they divine? Were they ancient memories of the Igigi, translated into Egyptian belief? Consider also the pyramids, built with such precision that even today their alignment with Orion and other constellations remains exact. Why? Why did the Egyptians care so much about star paths and celestial gates? Because their gods came from the sky. And maybe some of those sky gods were not gods at all. Maybe they were misremembered Igigi. There are no tablets in Egypt that say the word Igigi. But myths are not only passed through language, they pass through symbol, through role, through pattern. And the pattern is there. Watchers from above, beings of wisdom, sky travelers, silent judges, teachers who arrive and then disappear. The Vatican has never connected these dots, or if they have, they've never spoken of it. Because if the Igigi existed in more than one culture, their story becomes harder to erase. It becomes global, universal. In the temples of Egypt, carved deep into stone, the faces may change, but the roles remain the same. The Igigi might not be gone. They might just be wearing different names, watching from behind different masks, preserved not in name, but in memory. And Egypt may be the oldest mirror of all, reflecting back the sky with perfect clarity. Gothic cathedrals were not just places to pray. They were stone books, hidden libraries carved with symbols, numbers, and secrets for those who knew how to read them. And once you know what to look for, something strange starts to happen. The faces and symbols that fill these churches begin to echo something much older, something not of Christ or saints, but of the sky, the Igigi. Walk into a cathedral built between the 12th and 15th centuries and look up. You will see winged figures. But they are not angels, as you might expect. Many have no names, no halos. They do not hold harps or trumpets. They simply stand, silent and watching. Some are perched high above the altar, others are hidden in corners or carved into ceiling bosses. And then there are the eyes, repeated everywhere. One eye, all-seeing, watching from above. Sometimes it is in a triangle, sometimes surrounded by rays, other times just staring alone from the stone. The official story says it represents God, but similar eye symbols appear in Mesopotamian carvings thousands of years older. symbols tied to watchers, observers, the Igigi. Look closer at the vaulting of certain cathedrals, and you will find stars carved into the ribs, geometries that mimic constellations, zodiac wheels hidden in floor mosaics. These were not placed at random. Builders like the Templars were known to work with astronomical knowledge, and many of them believed the sky was not empty, that it was once filled with beings who guided and guarded the earth. In some French cathedrals, you will find figures with strange headpieces or stylized helmets, too futuristic for their time. Some even wear armor with wings attached not to their backs, but to their shoulders or heads. These are not biblical images. They resemble beings in Sumerian reliefs, winged watchers, just like the Igigi. Why would medieval architects include these things in churches? One possibility is that the builders were preserving forbidden knowledge, that they knew the church had buried the stories, that beneath the cross and behind the saints, the old watchers were still being remembered, not in text, but in stone. The Vatican never speaks of these symbols. Most guides and historians brush them off as artistic choices or medieval imagination, but the patterns are too consistent, too exact. When you realize these cathedrals align with solstices and star paths, when you realize the figures carved inside match beings described in texts long buried, you begin to understand. These were not accidents, they were messages. The Igigi may have vanished from scripture, but they never left our world completely. They were etched into the very bones of Europe's most sacred spaces, watching from above, still in their stations, still in their roles, waiting for someone to finally see them again. When people think of the Jesuits, they picture missionaries and scholars, priests with books, traveling the world to spread faith and build schools. But beneath that surface lies something stranger. The Jesuits are the keepers of the stars, holders of maps, measurements, and data that stretch back centuries. And among those archives may be the last remaining clues about the Igigi. The Vatican Observatory is not new. It was officially established in the late 16th century, but the Church had been tracking the skies long before that. And behind the telescopes and Latin names was one group given special access to the heavens: the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. They were mathematicians, engineers, linguists, and quietly, astronomers. By the 17th century, they had observatories all over the world, from Rome to Beijing, from South America to India, watching the stars, recording their paths, looking for patterns that might confirm or challenge the accepted story of creation. But why would a religious order spend so much time watching the heavens? Was it only for calendars and feast days? Or were they tracking something else? Something older, something forbidden. Some records from early Jesuit astronomers mention anomalies, strange objects moving in unnatural ways, bursts of light that followed no known comet, symbols seen through primitive lenses that reminded them of ancient signs. And many of these reports were quietly buried, moved to Rome, stored out of reach. There are whispers that the Jesuits discovered links between Sumerian sky myths and modern celestial movement, that certain stars held names known only to the oldest languages, that patterns in orbit matched the cycles described in the myths of the Igigi. They may have even found ways to calculate when these watchers first arrived. The Vatican denies this. It says the observatory is purely scientific, but it operates with more privacy than most state agencies. Access to certain books requires permission from high levels, and some sections are completely off limits. Why? If the stars are public, why guard the sky? The answer may lie in control. If the Igigi were real, if ancient myths about sky beings and celestial stations were true, then everything the Church has taught about heaven, angels, and creation would collapse. The role of mankind would change. The structure of belief would crack. The Jesuits are not just scholars, they are protectors, not of truth, but of order. Guardians of a story told one way, while hiding the rest in vaults beneath Rome. Some say the sky holds all memory, that nothing truly vanishes. Maybe that is why the Jesuits keep watching, not to discover, but to monitor, to make sure no one else connects the dots. The Igigi may not be gone, they may still be out there, and the ones who know for sure are the ones who refuse to speak. People think UFOs are new, a modern mystery born in the 20th century. But stories of flying objects and strange lights in the sky go back thousands of years. From ancient carvings to medieval paintings, the sky has never been silent. And hidden in those stories might be something older than aliens, something forgotten. The Igigi. The Igigi were said to be sky beings, not gods, not demons, but watchers, assigned to orbit the Earth, to observe, to report. Some say they lived in stations above the planet, and if you take that idea seriously, it sounds familiar. It sounds like what we now call spacecraft, or satellites, or something else entirely. In the 20th century, the term UFO exploded into the mainstream. Governments began tracking unidentified objects. Pilots reported strange craft moving faster than anything known. Civilians saw glowing discs, silent triangles, and lights that defied physics. But what if these were not visitors? What if they were returns? The patterns match. Ancient tablets describe fiery chariots descending from the sky. Beings that appear and vanish without a sound. Lights that move against the stars. These are not alien stories. They are Igigi stories, retold in modern words. Even the way they operate lines up. The Igigi were described as silent, always watching, only intervening when needed. UFOs follow the same behavior. They do not land in public squares. They hover, they circle, they vanish. And the silence from governments echoes the silence from the Church. Both deny. Both deflect. Both guard their archives. Because if these objects are real, and if they match ancient descriptions, then everything changes. In the 1940s and 50s, researchers started noticing the connection. That the beings described in early contact stories sounded more like mythological figures than aliens from other planets. Tall, glowing, often emotionless, often carrying messages about Earth's future, warnings, instructions. That is not alien behavior. That is the role of a watcher. Some believe the Igigi never left, that when they were removed from their stations, they did not vanish. They went quiet, waiting, watching from the shadows. And now, in the age of satellites and space telescopes, we are starting to see them again. Not because they returned, but because our eyes have finally reached far enough. The UFO enigma is not just about lights in the sky. It is about memory, about remembering something that was erased. The Igigi may be the missing piece in the alien puzzle, not visitors from another galaxy, but beings from our own ancient story, still out there, still watching. And the biggest question is not who they are, it is why they never made contact again. Or maybe they did, and someone made sure we forgot. Imagine if 300 years of history never happened, not a single war, not a single king, just inserted into the timeline like a forged signature. That is the idea behind the phantom time hypothesis. A theory that says the years between 614 and 914 were fabricated, and if that is true, then we are living in a false year, a manipulated calendar. But the bigger question is why? Who would alter history on that scale? And what were they trying to hide? The official story says the Anno Domini calendar, the one most of the world uses today, was created by a monk named Dionysius Exiguus in the 6th century. He was trying to calculate the date of Easter, but his numbers didn't quite line up. Later rulers like Charlemagne and even Pope Sylvester II had reasons to reshape the timeline, create false dynasties, align prophecies. But if the Igigi were real, and if they vanished from public myth around the same time, then maybe the edit was bigger than politics. Maybe it was cosmic. The disappearance of the Igigi from texts and temples happens in waves. One moment they are sky workers in Sumerian tablets. Then they are watchers in the Book of Anunnaki. Then they are symbols in stone. And then nothing. Silence. No mention. No trace. What if those missing centuries were used to wipe them out of memory? To erase the last known sightings? To burn the last scrolls? To reshape time so that no one would ask where the watchers went? Astronomical records tell their own story. Ancient civilizations tracked stars with such precision that some alignments only happen every few hundred years. But when modern astronomers check those positions against the accepted timeline, strange gaps appear. Missing cycles. Star paths that do not match the dates. Like something was shifted or covered up. The Church has long held the power to set calendars, to declare saints, to rewrite holidays. They turned pagan festivals into Christian ones, changed solstice observances into holy days. If they could do that with events, why not with time itself? The Igigi were a threat to the new order. They were symbols of a time when humans had access to cosmic knowledge. When the stars were not just decorations, but doorways. So the best way to control the future was to erase the past. And the best way to erase the past was to edit the clock. The phantom time hypothesis might sound like a strange idea, but once you link it to the disappearance of the Igigi, it starts to feel less like a theory and more like a strategy. They did not just erase the beings, they erased the years they lived in. And by doing that, they cut us off from the sky, from our real history, from the watchers who once stood above us. They were giants, heroes of old, men of renown. That is how the Bible describes them, the Nephilim, a mysterious group born from the union of the sons of God and the daughters of men. Most people read that line and move on, but hidden in those few verses is one of the most forbidden ideas in religious history. That beings from the sky not only came down to earth, but that they bred with humans, and what they left behind changed everything. In the Book of Enoch, the story becomes clearer. 200 watchers descended to earth. They were not demons. They were not fallen in the beginning. They were sent to observe, to watch. But they broke the rules. They took human wives. They had children. Those children were the Nephilim, giants, violent, powerful, a threat to balance itself. Now think back to the Igigi, skyworkers from Sumerian myth, beings who labored above earth, who rebelled, who came down. The patterns are identical. The timing lines up. What if the Watchers were just a different name for the Igigi? What if the Nephilim were the result of their rebellion? The Church does not like this story. It raises too many questions. If beings from the sky had children with humans, what does that make us? Are we purely divine creations? Or are we the descendants of something more ancient, more complex? The Nephilim were erased from most modern Bibles. Only a few verses remain. The full stories exist only in apocryphal texts, books banned from public reading, books kept in vaults beneath Rome. But even with just those scraps, the outline is clear. The Nephilim were not just myths. They were symbols of forbidden contact, a line that was never meant to be crossed. When the Watchers defied the cosmic order, they brought knowledge, weapons, medicine, science, and through their children, they brought chaos. The flood in Genesis is not just a punishment for human sin, it is a clean-up operation, a reset. The Nephilim had to be wiped away. But their memory survived, in legend, in stone, in whispered stories about giants and sky gods. And maybe that is why the Church buried the connection. Because if the Igigi and the Watchers are the same, and if the Nephilim were real, then we are not just the creation of one God. We are the product of a cosmic conflict, a mixture of heaven and earth. That truth would shatter the walls of any cathedral. It would tear through centuries of doctrine, because it means the divine was never clean. It was never pure. It was always layered, complicated, like us. The Nephilim were not just giants. They were reminders that once the sky came down and left a legacy written not in books, but in blood. Beneath Vatican City lies a hallway sealed with metal gates and ancient locks. Behind them is a place almost no one has ever seen, the Vatican Apostolic Archive. It holds over 50 miles of shelving, hundreds of thousands of documents, some dating back more than 1,000 years. It is not a library, it is a vault. And whatever truth the Church does not want the world to know is likely buried right there. To enter this archive, you need permission that almost no one gets. Scholars have been denied access to entire sections. Reporters are blocked. Even cardinals must request approval. This is not how normal history is protected. This is how secrets are buried. Inside are papal letters, maps, manuscripts, censored books, banned gospels, and astronomical records. But beyond those official items, there are rumours. Documents about beings from the stars, writings on pre-biblical entities, reports of sightings, omens, and otherworldly visitations hidden from the public. Some say the Church has full copies of the Book of Enoch, including versions that were never translated. Others claim there are Sumerian tablets locked away. Originals, not replicas. If the Igigi were once real, if they were seen as celestial workers or watchers, the Vatican would have every reason to suppress their memory. Their story challenges the neat binary of angels and demons. It reveals a structure older than Scripture, a cosmic system with ranks, stations, and rebellion. The Igigi complicate the official version of heaven, and that is something the Church cannot allow. Some believe that after the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century, the Church began to erase anything that didn't fit the chosen narrative. Books were destroyed, texts rewritten, and what could not be burned was locked away, placed in the dark, left to vanish from memory. In the late 19th century, the Vatican allowed a few researchers to enter the archive, but even then, they were only shown what the Church approved. The rest stayed hidden, behind closed doors, behind iron gates. What is the Church so afraid of? What truth could shake its foundations? Perhaps it is the knowledge that Earth was once visited by beings from the stars, that the Igigi walked among early civilizations, that the myths we call fiction are based on events, real ones, timed, tracked, documented, and maybe those documents are still there. Not lost, not destroyed, just waiting in silence, hidden under the streets of Rome. The Vatican holds the keys to more than faith. It holds the missing pages of human history, the locked records of heaven. And every year they remain sealed. The truth grows heavier. Somewhere behind those walls is the memory of the Igigi, still intact, still too dangerous to share. Astrology is often dismissed as a game. Horoscopes printed in magazines, star signs used in jokes or dating apps. But long before it became a trend, it was seen as a science, a sacred study. One of the oldest tools of understanding the connection between the stars above and the lives below. And at the center of that ancient knowledge stood the Igigi, the silent ones who mapped the heavens not just to predict fate, but to influence it. In ancient Mesopotamia, astrology was born not from imagination, but from observation. Priests and scribes would spend years watching the sky, recording every shift in the constellations, tracking planets, measuring eclipses. This was not superstition, it was data. And they believed the sky was not just a backdrop, it was a system, a coded message. The Igigi were said to be watchers, positioned above the earth. Their role was to observe human activity and report it back to higher powers. But what if they did more than just observe? What if they adjusted, calibrated, left markers in the sky so that we, the descendants of those early humans, could still read the pattern? Astrology works through cycles. Planets return to the same positions. Energies rise and fall. Certain alignments seem to match world events, wars, plagues, revolutions. This is not just random. Ancient astrologers believed these moments were echoes, triggers planted in the stars by those who once moved among them. The Igigi. Even the zodiac may have deeper roots than most realize. 12 signs, 12 months, 12 stations. The number repeats across cultures. In Sumer, in Babylon, in Egypt. These are not coincidences. They are reminders of watchers who once moved across 12 positions in the heavens. Some scholars believe that each sign once represented a specific Igigi, a guardian, a timekeeper. The church rejected astrology early on. It called it pagan, dangerous, but that did not stop it from using star charts in secret. Many popes had personal astrologers. Some cathedrals still align perfectly with star paths, hidden symbols carved into ceilings, maps of the heavens preserved in stained glass. Because even if astrology was forbidden, its power could not be denied. The sky still speaks, and those who listen can hear the ancient voice of the Igigi. Today, people still check their charts, still wonder about Mercury in retrograde, or the meaning of a full moon in Scorpio. But few realize this practice may come from a time when the sky was alive with motion, when watchers left behind a system of signs, a guide hidden in plain sight. The Igigi may no longer be visible, but their influence is still felt in fate, in timing, in the strange way the stars seem to know what is coming before we do. Astrology is not just prediction, it is memory, astral memory. And behind that memory are the watchers who mapped it all. Not all myths speak of endings. Some speak of return, a second coming, a cycle repeating, a door reopening, and hidden across ancient texts, scattered among prophecies and calendars, is the whisper that the Igigi may not be gone forever. They were sent once, they may be sent again. Or maybe they never truly left. Maybe they are just waiting for the right moment to step back into the world they once watched from above. The Sumerians never said the Igigi died. They said they revolted, that they were replaced, that some were sent back down to earth while others vanished into silence. The Book of Enoch tells a similar story. The Watchers were cast down, bound, but not destroyed, locked away until a future time, a judgment, a reckoning. Even the Mayan calendar speaks of cycles, the end of one age followed by the rise of another, a time when the sky opens, when the ancestors return. In some versions of Hopi legend, the sky people come back when the earth reaches imbalance, to restore or to reset. This idea shows up again and again, from the Book of Revelation to Zoroastrian texts. The Watchers are never erased. They are paused, bound by cosmic law, waiting for their station to begin again. If the Igigi followed star cycles, then their return would be predictable, timed to planetary movements, celestial gates, solar alignments. And maybe that is why the Church has always tracked the stars, not just to mark holidays, but to know when the door opens again. Modern prophecy is no different. In the 20th century, people began reporting dreams, visions, messages from glowing beings who spoke of correction, of balance returning. Some even used names that sounded like echoes of older ones, names with strange consonants, ancient vowels. They claimed they were watchers, not gods, not aliens, but something in between. Even governments seemed to be preparing. Sudden interest in UFOs, declassified files, new observatories aimed not just outward, but inward, like they are waiting, watching for something to arrive or return. The Igigi may have been removed from stories, but stories have a way of remembering what history forgets. The myths always said they would return, and maybe the signs are already here. Unexplained signals, planetary alignments, strange dreams shared across continents, the feeling that something is approaching, something old, not from another world, but from a time before time. They were the first to watch, the first to descend, the ones who carried knowledge and order, and if the cycle is real, they will come again, not in fire, not in war, but in memory, in symbols, in the sky. The question is not, are they coming back? The question is, will we be ready when they do? Not everyone forgot. While the Vatican buried names and the state rewrote dates, some chose to remember. Quietly, in shadows. Behind locked doors and coded symbols, the secret societies. From Masonic lodges to Hermetic orders, these groups were never just about rituals and mystery. They were about memory, keeping alive the knowledge the world was told to forget. And within their guarded teachings is something strange, a repeated theme, a memory of sky beings, the Igigi. Freemasonry is often linked to architecture, sacred geometry. But look deeper, and you find stories of builders who learned their craft from watchers, who were guided by forces not of this world. The great architect of the universe is not named, but is always watching, always above. The Masonic tracing boards show a stairway to the stars, a ladder rising past planets and moons, a hint that the true light of Masonry does not shine from Earth. Hermeticism goes even further. Rooted in Egyptian and Greek mystery schools, it speaks of beings who descended in ancient times, teachers of alchemy, astronomy, the laws of balance. The Emerald Tablet says, as above, so below, a reflection between heaven and earth, a code passed down from the Watchers. Some Hermetic texts even describe beings with no fixed form, made of light, dwelling in the upper air. The Church condemned these teachings, called them occult, dangerous. But why would simple philosophy be feared unless it held something deeper? Unless it carried a thread that could unravel the entire narrative? Many secret societies used symbols tied to the stars, the all-seeing eye, the winged disk, the blazing star. These were not just decorations, they were reminders. emblems of a time when humans and sky beings shared knowledge, when the veil between worlds was thin. Even the rituals speak of a fall, a descent, a death and rebirth, a journey through darkness toward light. The same pattern found in myths of the Igigi, of watchers who came down, who suffered, who were hidden, but who would return. Some believe that the highest degrees of these societies hold the real story, that beneath the layers of allegory and coded language lies the memory of the first contact, the truth of what the Igigi taught, where they came from, why they left. This is not fantasy. This is preservation. The church may control the texts, the state may shape the curriculum, but the secret societies guard something older, a memory passed from hand to hand, protected in silence. Those who remember do not speak publicly, but their symbols are everywhere, on buildings, on money, in stained glass and city grids. They are reminders that the Watchers once walked among us, and that their story did not vanish, it simply went underground, waiting for those with eyes to see. For centuries, the Vatican has answered questions about God-angel sin and salvation. It has issued statements on morality evolution and even modern technology. But there is one topic it never fully addresses, one mystery it refuses to explain: the ancient sky beings, the Watchers, the Igigi. No matter how many signs point to their influence, no matter how many artifacts are uncovered, the Vatican remains silent. Not confused, not unsure, silent. This silence is not passive, it is strategic. In the early centuries of the Church, texts that spoke of sky beings were banned. The Book of Enoch was excluded from the Bible. Gnostic writings were burned. Sumerian connections were dismissed as pagan myth. Every thread that might lead back to the Igigi was cut or hidden. When modern discoveries began revealing star maps in ancient temples or carvings that showed figures descending from above, the church gave no comment, not even denial, just absence. As if saying nothing is safer than saying the wrong thing. Pope after pope has been asked about the possibility of extraterrestrial life. Some gave vague answers about God's universe being vast. Others said nothing at all. The Vatican Observatory studies the stars, but refuses to connect their findings to ancient texts. Why? The truth may be simple. The Church is not protecting belief. It is protecting structure. The entire system of salvation relies on a clear chain of events: creation, fall, redemption. If beings like the Igigi existed and interacted with early humans, then that chain is broken. If knowledge came from Watchers instead of revelation, then authority shifts. Silence becomes the last defense. A wall built not with arguments, but with refusal. The Church does not debate the Igigi. It acts like they never existed. Even as their symbols are carved into cathedral walls, even as their patterns are mirrored in stained glass. This silence extends beyond theology. It touches history, astronomy, and even language. Terms like Watchers or heavenly host are blurred, their meanings reduced to metaphor, their origins never explained. Some say the Vatican's silence is because the truth is too large, too dangerous, that revealing the Igigi story would unravel the control the Church has built for over 1,000 years. Others believe the silence hides fear, that the return of the Watchers would mean the end of religious hierarchy. Whatever the reason, the silence speaks volumes. It tells us there is something to hide, something the Church cannot destroy, but refuses to confirm. The Vatican's final silence is not ignorance. It is power, the kind of power that knows truth is not erased by fire, but by forgetting. And the longer it stays silent, the more we must ask what it is they are truly afraid of. Because in that silence, the memory of the Igigi still echoes, waiting to be heard. Look up. The sky you were taught to see is a calm ceiling painted blue. But if you listen to the oldest stories, watch the patterns of the stars, and follow the trails of forgotten names, you notice something unsettling. That ceiling is a mask. The sky is not empty. It is a stage with the lights turned low. It is a hallway with doors that were closed on purpose. And just beyond those doors, the watchers wait. We have followed traces across the world, clay tablets whispering about workers in the heavens, cathedrals carved with eyes that never blink, books banned and buried for claiming that messengers descended and taught forbidden things. Everywhere the same shape returns. Not a neat world split into simple good and simple evil, but a layered system where truth travels in secret. The Igigi were part of that system. They watched. They resisted. They left marks in stone and memory, and then they were erased from public sight. Erasing a name does not erase a presence. The more we read the past with honest eyes, the more the pattern pushes back. Timed cycles in the sky. Legends that match across cultures that never met. Stories that begin in the east and reappear in the west with different clothing, but the same bones. Even our languages still carry the echoes, hidden in words for messengers, for ladders, for gates in the air. The question is not whether the sky once held watchers. The question is what kind of people we become if we choose not to see them. Blindness is comfortable. It lets us live inside a simple story where everything important is handed to us, and nothing dangerous is ever asked. But comfort is the enemy of memory, and memory is the beginning of freedom. If the Vatican keeps quiet, if schools skip the pages that do not fit, if films keep repainting the same two colors over every age, that does not mean the truth vanished. It means the truth needs new guardians. People who can read symbols without fear. People who can ask without asking for permission. People who can sit under a night sky and refuse to call it empty. This is not a call to worship the unknown. It is a call to look again, to test, to compare, to cross-check myths with stars, maps with rites, ruins with words, to notice when silence is used like a lock, to recognize when a story has been stretched to hide a doorway. The watchers do not need you to believe. They need you to pay attention. One day soon you will stand outside and the air will feel different, like the world is holding its breath. When that moment comes, remember what you learned. The oldest lights were signals. The oldest names were warnings and invitations. The sky is not empty. It never was. If you can carry that single sentence into your life, you will not be easy to control. You will not be easy to blind. And maybe, just maybe, you will be ready when the doors open again.